Alrighty guys, welcome to the Language Bee HL oral guide. So I'm going to be going through exactly what you need to do to get the top mark, top grade boundary, and to really ace your oral exam.
Hey guys, sorry, I just realized I was editing this how bad that background noise is. I'm so sorry, it sounds terrible, I know, but I promise 5-6 minutes in, it all goes away, and this tractor, I don't know what it was. Anyway, it doesn't matter, goes away. So please make sure you stick to the end. I know it is a super long video, it's 30 minutes or so long. It is so useful. It literally includes every single thing I wish I'd known about my oral exams, and of course, getting my 27, 28 out of 30 for ASL and HL. I know my thing. I spent a lot of time revising, and so please take notes. It's going to be so invaluable. And I kid you, in the last 5 minutes, stick to the end, because in the last 5 minutes, I share my 2 methods that I use to revise and to practice for the oral exam. I kid you not, I just use 2 day in, day out. So make sure you stick to the end, guys, and back to the video.
So personally, in November 2020, which is when I did my exams, I did Spanish B HL and Chinese B SL. So my Spanish B HL, I got 27 out of 30, and in Chinese B SL, I got 28 out of 30. So you can say that I know pretty well what I'm doing with my oral exams for Language B. So please make sure you listen, take some good notes, because there's going to be some really invaluable content for you to get out of this. Because really, think about it. If a lot of people, if you're doing Language B HL, you're either competing with native speakers or you're a native speaker yourself. That's really how it works. For example, for Spanish, for my year group, the grade boundary to get a 7, you had to get 87%. It was crazy. Meanwhile, for Chinese, I only needed to get something like 78%. So it's a huge difference. So you have to do really well. You have to get crazy high marks in your Language B HL if you want to get one of those high grade boundaries, because you are competing against native speakers. So it's really about learning exactly what the IB requires from you, because it doesn't really matter. You can be a native speaker and still get a 5 or a 4. That's really happened. That's what my teacher said a few of her students. It really depends. You need to exactly analyze what the IB is looking for, which is what we're going to be doing today. So this is going to be super valuable for everybody, regardless of your skill level, regardless of what you're going for, to really boost your marks. So let's get straight into this. I'm getting this directly. Everything's coming directly from the Language B guide. I'm not making this up, guys. This is exactly what the IB wants. So let's get straight into it. So of course, most of you know the structure already, but we'll go over it quickly anyway. So you're going to get 2 extracts, and actually May 2021, you're going to get 4 extracts, 2 from each book. But everyone else, any other group, if you're watching this, you're going to be getting 1 extract from one book and 1 extract from the other book. Because of course, you should have read both books, don't forget. And whenever you get these 2 books, then you pick one. Now what a lot of people do is that, yes, they read both books, but there's no point analyzing both books if you're only going to pick one. So what a lot of people do, which is what I did, is that I picked one book that I really understood and got familiar with, and then I only studied that day in, day out. I didn't really look at this book. So whenever I got... Now the risk in that is that when you get these 2 extracts, you're immediately going to throw away the book. You're going to discard the book that you didn't study, because of course you didn't study for it. You have no idea what it's about, really. So you're going to throw that away, so you're stuck with the extract that your teacher has chosen for that one particular book that you've studied. So it is a risk, but I think it is worth it, because either you have to double the workload and study 2 books to some extent, or you can really focus down into one book and study that really hard. So that's what I did. This was I would suggest, but yeah, just keep that in mind whenever you're studying for this. I only chose one, but you can pick to study both texts if you want. So again, you get 20 minutes this time. For HL, you get 20 minutes preparation time, which of course you would need, because you are doing a literary analysis to some extent, similar to the IO in English, or you're in your Language A. Anyway, so 20 minutes of preparation, then 3 to 4 minutes of speaking, and this is where you just talk about only the extract. Everything you mention has to be directly relevant to the extract. We'll go over this later. This is a brief overview. Then after that, your teacher asks you questions about that extract and about the themes that are relevant to that extract. So within part 1, you should have mentioned this is the extract, and these are some themes that it's relevant to. And then your teacher is then going to ask you questions for 4 to 5 minutes about more things about the extract and more things about that theme that it's relevant. And then finally, in the last section, for the last 5 or 6 minutes, the teacher's just going to ask you random questions that can be from any theme, from absolutely anything, yeah? And let's get straight into what the IB guide is asking. So within these 20 minutes, you get time to make up to 10 notes in bullet point form. However, the key thing that I want to point out here is that it says that they must not be read aloud as a prepared speech during the exam. So what this means is that I know different schools understand the 10 notes and bullet points, and they follow it differently, and not all of them completely abide by it. But the key aspect that is really important is that regardless of how much you write in your notes, depending on your teacher, depending on the school, depending on what you do, but either way, regardless of how many notes you write during those 20 minutes preparation time, You cannot just read it as a speech. It is an oral exam. You need to make sure that you act as if you're just speaking naturally. You want to sound like you're just speaking and you're not reading anything at all. So whenever you have something, when I made my notes, mine were all dot points, mine were all bullet points. I actually made a mind map. That's how I kind of practiced my notes, and that's how I made the structure to my notes during that preparation time. But every single person is different. But make sure whatever you do, you don't write out sentences. You have plenty of time. Within those 20 minutes, you could easily write out a speech for 3 to 4 minutes. However, don't do that. That is just exactly not what they want, okay? That is not what they're looking for. Instead, you want just some brief guiding notes that you can then use to continue speaking and sound natural. Alright, it is now time to get into the bread and butter of what you're actually doing in the presentation. What on earth are you supposed to talk about for those 3 to 4 minutes? What are you going to go on about? What are you going to rant on about? So, essentially, what you have to do, there's 3 things that clearly mentioned in the Language B guide. I'm not making these up once again. It says first, summarize the extract. Secondly, briefly relate the extract to the literary work as a whole. And thirdly, express your opinions on the characters, events, ideas, and themes present in the extract. So again, this is what I did. It gives you exactly what you need to do. Why not just follow it to the T? Say exactly what you have to do. So first of all, summarize the extract. And before I go on, I want to point out the sentence that says right below it. It says the presentation must relate specifically to the content of the extract provided. If you keep reading, pre-rehearsed presentations on generic aspects of a literary work or presentations in the style of a book review that do not directly focus on the content of the extract provided are not the objective of this exercise. So what it's trying to say is that every single thing you mention must be relevant to the extract. Once again, you need to summarize the extract. So what you do, or at least what I did, this is kind of the structure I followed. First, I gave a very brief guide, a very brief introduction to the book. For example, I said, today I have chosen the extract from book this, published in this year, and if that year has any particular significance, you can include a small bit of context of that year, but literally not more than a sentence. So it's published in this year by this guy. Then I start immediately talking about the extract. I said this extract, what is happening in this extract is that character A, then you mention who character A is doing this. This is important because, and then you must relate it to the rest of the extract. So you make sure you summarize the extract, get the key ideas out of there, and then say, well, and actually in the process of doing so, you explain only what they need to know. There's no point saying, okay, character A, later on in the story she dies, and then later on her father is confused because she's dead and then she has no idea what to do. There's no point going on about the future of the text. Only mention what is directly relevant. Once again, it says summarize the extract. It doesn't say summarize the novel. Summarize what is going on. Secondly, briefly relate that extract to the rest of the novel. So you can say this extract is situated in the first half of the novel, towards the end of the novel. This is important because, and only give the relevant context that's required. Make sure, you situate it, nothing too special other than making sure that you give it its place in the novel. This doesn't mean explain the whole novel. That is not what it's saying. It's saying this piece is in this section, okay? And then you mention only what they need to know to understand the extract. Because what you have to think about it this way. I know in Language B, HL, I know one of the examiners that actually examines, or one of the many that examines the assessments, and she said that she actually hasn't read any of the books that's on our book list, any of the books that we are going to speak. So whenever you have to pretend that the examiner has never heard the book that you're talking about, because they probably haven't. Honestly, that's how it works. They're only paid to mark. They're not paid to read the book that you're analyzing, sorry. So make sure that you're acting like the person doesn't understand, has never read the book before. So only explain and relate the things that are important, because they have no idea otherwise what's going on in the story. They don't know who the protagonist is. They don't know the plot of the story. They don't know who wrote the book. They don't know when it was written. They don't know the importance or the overarching theme within the book, or the themes, or whatever's going on. They have zero clue. You've got to explain it yourself, okay? So make sure you relate the extract to the rest of the literary work, but only what's required. So if you keep going, the next thing is that you have to express your opinions on the characters, events, ideas, and themes presented in the extract. So this is really where you start analyzing, or at least what I do, is that you analyze what's going on in the story. So you say, oh, okay, we can see in this simile, in this metaphor, this makes me feel. So it's all about you, because, again, express your opinions. You can say, this is my favorite character, or in the novel, I am fond of this character, or I think that she's not nice, or I totally understand what they're going through. And you have to express your opinions. For example, in my book, Con Waga para Chocolate, where this teenager overdosed on drugs and then she fell into a coma and all her friends were there and kind of like pressured her to pressure her to take the drugs, and then the parents are angry. But the whole book was all about her friends trying to help find the drug to then give to the scientists so they can figure out what it was, to then give it the medication. So just brief analysis, that's even way too much. If I said that in my oral exam, I'd be marked down because I'm not giving what's relevant. You only give what's relevant. But what I'm trying to say is that, so if this, let's say that's my story, I was thinking one of the things I mentioned in my thing is that actually I would be interested to see how this book would play out, or I'd be interesting to see the point of view of the parents because they're not seen or they're not really described within the text. So one of the things I mentioned, again, expressing my opinion, I said, in my opinion, I think it would be interesting if the author also demonstrated or represented the thoughts and beliefs and the point of view of the parents, because it gives a different perspective and we might have seen it from a different angle and point of view, and that can shed a light on different societal issues within our community. So it's just all these different things you can talk about. It doesn't have to be as that fancy or that particular, but just make sure that you express your opinions, whether it's on the character, once again, on the events, on the ideas, or on the theme. So again, when it says theme, then this is where you have to relate it to the theme. So within this part one, where you just talk about the novel, so you do all your thing, you talk about what's going on in the novel, all the things I said, and then at the end, or at least what I did, and it sounds like this is what you have to do here, relate it to a theme. And it's really vital. If you can figure out within your book which themes does your novel relate to, which themes does your book relate to, and see which ones are most common throughout your book. For example, in mine, it was all about identity, because it's about, okay, what shapes our identity? Why would you take drugs? How does this change your identity? What's the importance of friends when you fall ill and you fall sick and you need some help and you need a hand? So it's really important that you understand what different themes play a role within your text and within your novel, and make sure that you can actually relate what on earth is going on to a theme, because that will be incredibly important in part 2, which we're going to talk about right now. Within part 2, there's a follow-up discussion based on the literary extract. So that's really one of the few things that you might be asked. So the teacher can seek clarification, she can invite the student to interpret and value the ideas that you've already presented, encourage connections, comparisons, whatever it is. But essentially, you're just talking about the text and talking about that theme. So don't freak out if you can't include everything you wanted to include within this 3 to 4 minutes. After all, they're only 3 to 4 minutes. You can't go on about a whole rant. You can't include your whole spiel within it. So don't worry if you can't include everything, because your teacher will be able to ask you questions and then you can include the answer to those questions, or you can just further expand what you wanted to say in those next 4 to 5 minutes that you have with your teacher when they ask you a question and then you answer them. So that's really, really important. And finally, general discussion. Part 3, this is where the teacher asks you random questions for any theme. It can be, it has to be a different theme. It can be 1, 2, or even 3 different themes. And you just speak for 5 to 6 minutes and make sure you relate them to the themes. So now we're going to go straight into the marking criteria, so you know how you're being marked and what exactly you have to do to get the top mark band. So let's get into criterion A, language. What it says is that how successfully does the candidate command spoken language? Although this may sound like, are you a native speaker? How well do you know the language? Can you actually speak it? Yes, that may sound like what it is, but actually read through this dot point. The second one, which I think is vital that you have to understand, it says, to what extent are the grammatical structures varied? Now, before I go too far into this, let's read what the top mark band says. It says, vocabulary is appropriate to the task and nuanced and varied in a manner that enhances the message, including the purposeful use of idiomatic expressions. Now, notice how the only or the major difference between the highest mark band and the second highest mark band is that including the use of idiomatic expressions, nice, but the one above it doesn't have idiomatic expressions. So you need to make sure that if you don't include idiomatic expressions, bang, straight away you're losing 2 mark bands and you're getting 6 out of 12 maximum, okay? So make sure that you must include idiomatic expressions, and it says here, they have to be the purposeful use of idiomatic expressions. So what this means is that you need to know a lot, okay? In SL, you just need to know a handful of idiomatic expressions and mention them, and that's nice, that the mark will be impressed. In HL, instead, you need to make sure that you know nuanced idiomatic expressions, and they have to be purposeful. So whether that is using an idiomatic expression that is only used within a particular context, that is very rare, or something very subtle, or something that's not used very often, that is only used in a particular context, that would be awesome. That'd be incredible if you can do that, and you can amaze the marker and surprise the marker. But really just make sure that everything you say is purposeful, and it shows that you understand the grasp of the language. So make sure what I did is that I learned idiomatic expressions for each one of the themes. For example, I learned loads about identity, or some that have to do with your identity. For example, whether it's idiomatic expressions about describing different ways to be thin. For example, there's loads of different ways to describe someone. You don't just say they're thin. There's at least 10 or 15 different ways that I learned that in Spanish. You can describe someone as thin. It's like, It's incredible. So make sure that you know loads of different idiomatic expressions related to the contents of your book. So that way, within part 1 and part 2, you can then just smash in loads of idiomatic expressions in every second sentence, basically. Don't go overboard. Don't just say whole sentences just to include an idiomatic expression, unless it's really worthwhile. But normally, I doubt it. Normally, I wouldn't recommend doing that. Just make it sound natural, okay? So that is why you need to learn a lot of idiomatic expressions. It is vital. So next thing that I really want to point out, and something that you probably haven't thought about, is read this. A variety of basic and more complex grammatical structures is used selectively in order to enhance communication. So you really need to include complex grammatical structures. So what does this mean? You need to learn conjunctions. You need to know your conjunctions off by heart. And you need to know a lot of them too. You need to know which ones are formal, which ones are informal, and how to use them. Because you don't want to be in the middle of your oral exam and be like, oh, how do I use however? How do I use whatever conjunction you've learned? How do I use that? Is this the right time? Is this formal? Is this not formal? You need to know them. You need to be very confident in order to use them. It's different using them in writing as to using them in an oral exam. Because in an oral exam, you're just speaking, and there is no stopping. You only have half a second max to think. Meanwhile, in a writing exam, you can sit back, relax for 2-3 minutes, and just sit there thinking about, oh, is this right? Is this not right? I'm not really sure. It is totally different to a writing exam, totally different to your paper 1. So make sure you are very confident with loads of different complex grammatical structures that you can use to pretty much show off to the marker, show off to the IB marker that you know your language very well. So what this means, for example, is that in Spanish, you can change your grammatical structures, you can use a subjunctive, so make sure you know all the different verb tenses, and you have to be confident with your verb tenses, okay? So you need to basically show off every single thing you know. So that is using the subjunctive, that is using the imperfect, that is using all the different types of conjugation, that you know. So you need to make sure that you use regular and irregular verbs, and again, passive, non-passive, and make sure that you just have a variety of different things, okay? So make sure you have a variety of different conjugations and all the different verb tenses that are required to show off your knowledge of the language. And this is what it means. Look at this. So whenever you include a complex grammatical structure, first of all, they're impressed, but look at how much they really want you to use these grammatical structures, and let me explain why. If you read the next line, it says, minor errors, even in the top mark band, minor errors in more complex grammatical structures do not interfere with communication. So what they're saying is that you're not perfect, you're not a native, because you're doing language B, you're not doing a language A. This is your language B. So they're encouraging you, they're incentivizing you to use complex grammatical structures. They want you to try these out. And if you do a small error within these complex grammatical structures, you're not going to lose the mark band. If you do it in a simple one, yeah, of course you are, because that's just a simple mistake. But if you're trying out something really hard, whether it's a hard conjugation or it's a hard sentence structure that has like 4 different verb tenses within it, or whatever it is, they don't mind if you make a small mistake. That's just one thing. Take that in mind. Keep that in mind, is that it doesn't matter if you make a small mistake when you're trying to do something really challenging, okay? So don't freak out if you make a small mistake during the thing. If you realize, just keep going, carry on. It's not the end of the world, okay? So really, I really incentivize you, really push you to challenge yourself and to really learn all these different types of complex grammatical structures. So now if we keep going to criterion B1, which is message of the literary extract, it says, how relevant are the ideas to the literary extract? And this is key. I mentioned it before, but just count how many times the syllabus guide says relevant. It is incredible. So look at this. How relevant are the ideas? So then it says here that the presentation is consistently relevant, once again, to the literary extract and convincing. And that's something I really want to point out. The biggest difference between the second highest and the highest mark band in this case is whether your argument is convincing or not. Look at this. It says, the candidate makes effective use of the extract, of course, so everything you say has to be relevant to the extract that is provided. And then, observations and opinions are effectively developed and supported with reference to the text. This is what my teacher and I practice for literally weeks on end. Because I'd talk about I'd see the text, I'm like, oh, you know Belinda, and like she's a character in the story, and then I just rant on about her and about her story and about how how there's a theme embedded within her, and every time she does this, it represents like society, whatever it was. You need to make sure that every single thing is relevant to the text. It has to be embedded and grounded into the novel, into the extract that is given in front of you. You can't just relate to the whole novel. That is not what this is asking you. It's not a book review. It said it in the first paragraph. We've gone over this. It is all related to the exact extract that you're being given and the extract that you've chosen. So make sure that please just make that simple decision. Everything has to be relevant. So if we keep going, the next one, criterion B2. How relevant are the ideas in the conversation? The IB is something about relevance. I'm not sure why, but they absolutely love the word. So let's keep reading. How appropriately and thoroughly does the candidate respond to the questions in the conversation? And to what depth are the questions answered? So really, other than just having to answer the questions, relevance. So if the teacher asks you, okay, what's the meaning? Or tell me more about this character. And you're like, oh, this character, her name's Melinda. She was born in this year. And in the novel, she has a significant role because of this and this and this. That's nice. You answer the question. It's relevant. Good job. But then you also need to make sure that your questions need to have a depth to them. So what this means, let me just keep reading it. You'll understand what I mean. The candidate's response on the top mark band, it says the candidate's response are consistently relevant to the question, and look at the difference between the highest and second highest mark band, and show some development. What does this mean? Okay, so basically, if she asks you the question, who is this character? Describe the character, but then make sure you keep developing it. So then you say, okay, so this is a character. And you say, within this extract, she is particularly important because, or just show some sort of development. Make sure that you use the question as a platform to then keep going, to make sure that, of course, you need to make sure everything you say is relevant, but also they're looking for some development. Don't just answer the question. So what I mean by this is that if your teacher asks you a question, make sure that you can go on about it for 20 to 45 seconds, okay? If you answer a question with one sentence, you're done, you're stuffed. You want to make sure you can speak for at least 3 to 4 sentences per each question asked. Make sure you keep speaking and you need to show some depth and some development. So let's keep reading. It says that the responses are broad in scope and depth. Once again, depth is important. And listen to this. This is another aspect that is different between the highest and second highest mark band. You need to include personal interpretations and or attempts to engage the teacher. That's what that means basically. So what this means, or at least from my understanding, including personal interpretations. Again, this is similar to what they're asking in the first section, which is what are your beliefs, what are your opinions of the text, of the extract, of the characters. But it also, within your personal interpretations, this could be when your teacher asks you a question, then you give your personal interpretation on it. You answer it, but then you use it as a building block to keep going to wherever you want to go, to wherever it relates to. And then next, you want to make sure that you engage the teacher. Now, this is one thing that I've noticed a lot of teachers and students have not noticed within a new syllabus, because this is new to the syllabus, these 5-6 words, key and vital if you want to get the top mark band. And what we decided within all the different teachers I heard and all the different kids at other schools that we talked about these few words, what does this mean? So basically, you want to engage and connect with the teacher. So what this means is that otherwise what a lot of people do is that the teacher asks you a question, you answer a question. Teacher asks, you answer. Teacher asks, you answer. That's not how a conversation works. That's not how normal chat flows within a daily life. So what you want to do is make it sound a bit more natural. So what this means is that, I don't know, for example, within part 3, where you're just talking about a random theme that is not really relevant to the extract, if your teacher asks you about a diet, and then you could say, oh, for example, I've heard that when you grew up in Seville, I heard that this is the type of food that you eat. Is this correct? Does this sound right? And even if it's just that small thing where your teacher just says yes, that is literally all they have to do. They just have to say yes or no. Like, and give them a short question. You're not interviewing them. You're not testing. The IB doesn't care about your teacher's skill level. They know they're a Spanish teacher or whatever language teacher they are. They know that they can talk. It's all about you trying to engage them within the conversation. So whether that is asking them a super brief question, or another thing that you can do is suggest them or invite them to something. Or for example, if you're talking about the food markets, you can say, I don't know, somehow you incorporate this into your response. You're saying, oh, last year I went to a food market in Peru and I saw the different types of vegetables, and that really represents the lifestyle of those people because all of them work in the fields and then this and that. And then you can say, actually, miss, I would strongly suggest for you to go to them when you have the chance to, because it was such an incredible experience for me. I think you would learn a lot from it and really help you open your eyes. So again, you've included open your eyes, which is another idiomatic expression. And then you've also included the teacher and engage with the teacher in one sentence. That's what I want you to do. That is what the IB is looking for. They want you to engage with the teacher, make it sound like a natural, spontaneous conversation, not an exam. Make it sound like a normal conversation as much as you can, of course. There are some limits, but make sure you make it sound natural. And try to include as many idiomatic expressions as you can and make sure they are purposeful, as I mentioned earlier. So if we keep going, the next criterion is criterion C, interactive skills and communication, which is really just how you understand and interact with the questions. Do you really know? Do you answer the questions? Do you know what's being asked from you? So basically the final 6 marks are comprehension and interaction are consistently sustained, there's really nothing to this. It's really just understanding and explaining. Do you understand what's being asked from me? And I really just want to point out this one last point. It says participation is sustained with some independent contributions. What on earth does this mean? Well, this, I think, or at least what everyone that I talked to, we thought this related to what talked about earlier. That including the personal interpretation sounds very similar to including the the independent contributions. So really what we understood from this is that just give your own spin on things. Talk about your lifestyle, talk about whatever you talk about, try to relate it to yourself and to your life. That I'd be really likes whenever you, again, it's like personal engagement in your IAs. That's how I like to put it. So within your physics IA or chemistry or whatever you do for your IA, you want to show how it's important to you and why this would change you, why you think this is a nice topic. Similar thing here. So you can talk about the text and you can say, actually, this is in part 2, not in part 1. Part 1, you talk about the extract itself. In part 2 or part 3, you can say this text or this theme or this idea is really important to me. And this is because last year when I went here, I really noticed the impact that identity has when I went to Peru, and I noticed how the indigenous cultures live, and I noticed how even though I couldn't have lived in those cultures, I really appreciate the variety of lifestyles that we have here on Earth, and I know that even in South America it's completely different. There's such a variety of lifestyles. So even small things, just make sure you show some independent contributions that are personal to you. So that's how I understand from it. And so one last question you may have, now that we've gone through the criteria, gone through the structure, is how on earth do I practice? That's nice, but what on earth am I going to do? I've got 2 methods for you, and I use both of them. So one's not better than the other. You need to use both, or at least I use both. The first method is good for both the oral exam, but also for paper 1. So what I did is that every single theme and sub-theme has questions. In your textbook, there will be guiding questions. I can assure you that. In my Spanish book, I had them if you really don't have them, I'll link a document down below that has them published by the IB. But your textbook should have way more questions than this. It should be like 6 or 8 per theme, something like that. I forgot exactly the number. But use these questions as a guide. So I had these questions as a title. I'll include a screenshot somewhere. I had these questions as a title. And then what I do is that I put in as many dot points under it as I could. So for example, if your teacher asks you a question along those lines, one of them might be, what constitutes your identity? These are some TOK style questions, but really vital for you to get in your head, to get an idea of what you have to talk about. So if one of them is, what impacts your identity? Then you can have a dot point about food. How does food and diet impact our identity? Next could be about history. How does history impact our identity? How does religion impact our identity? How do our family values impact our identity? How does our age, language, traditions, customs? There are so many things you can talk about all from that one particular dot point. So then, of course, in your target language, don't do this in English, you can make sure they just get all these dot points down. And this, again, this is what I did. If you have an idiomatic expression that can particularly use for that one dot point, include your idiomatic expression there. If you have a fact or if you have a personal life story or a personal connection that you can include it there. This is really, mine ended up being over 20 pages of just notes. This is gold where you're going to write. So all of this is that if you gave this to a marker, they'd give you full marks. But of course, you can't do that. That was in the old syllabus. It was interesting, but anyway, let's not talk about that. In the new syllabus, it's all about the oral exam and paper 1. And because listening's gone, the oral exam is so much more important than what it used to be. So please make sure that you write a big document with all these different ideas that you wish you could include. These are gold. Every single thing that is in this document, you wish you could include and you're very confident in adding. But of course, you never know what you're going to be asked and you never know what the extract is going to be. But essentially, answer all these questions and try to include as much vocab as you can, as much advanced vocabulary. For example, in Spanish, there's the word of sobremesa, which is really the act of, whilst you're sitting at lunch or sitting at a meal within your family or with family and friends, it's the act of talking to each other during a meal to really bond over each other. So make sure that, again, just to show that you understand the language, you need to know a handful, or at least a couple dozen, of different words that can't be translated into English. A few words that are really just particular to that language, that are part of that language's identity almost. So make sure you know words that cannot be translated, advanced words, sentence structures, grammatical structures, and idiomatic expressions, as I've mentioned earlier. So now I want to point out, finally, the last thing I'm going to talk about is my second method of how I revise and prepared for my oral exam. It's going to sound strange, I know. Speak to the wall. There is no other way of me describing it other than I was just speaking. I would just put my headphones on and speak to the wall for as long as I could. Because what this does, this really practices your oral skills. This practices how well you can speak without interrupting yourself, without stopping. Because really what the oral exam is, it's the first section is 3 to 4 minutes of you just speaking. So you need to be able to speak, be able to catch yourself. Sometimes you start a sentence and you have no idea where it's going, and you have to be able to nicely finish it and make it sound like an actual and proper sentence. So you want to make sure that you have to practice and practice just speaking without end and just speaking for as long as you can. So just practice the skill. And then the second aspect of it is similar to what I did in the first method that I talked about, is that I talked about, for example, identity. Then just rant on about identity and see where you go. For example, you can say, oh, let's talk about identity. I know that one of the things that's part of identity is festivals. I know that festivals are different in all around South America. For example, the quinceañera. Actually, I know that the quinceañeras change over years and how it's celebrated differently. For example, even though it's traditional to Mexico, now it's celebrated in Spain. So then suddenly you're now talking about the difference in festivals around the world and around Spanish-speaking countries, and you're like, oh, I know in Spain the quinceañera actually has a completely different meaning. And this symbolizes how throughout the world, multiculturalism, where you can talk, it really depends where you go. But it's just that you going and just following your mind, just following wherever your brain goes. Because this is great practice for section 2 and 3, where we have to start answering a question. And of course, you get basically 1 second to think about what you're going to say. Then you have to speak for 2 or 3 sentences, which is like 30 or 40 seconds. So you don't have time to immediately know every single thing that you're going to say within this 30 or 40 seconds. Instead, you only know where you're going to start. And the thing that a lot of people find hard is trying to continue and again, build up on the question that is being asked while staying relevant. That is really the biggest thing that I can really suggest for you to do. Practice this section. Everyone can answer the first 10 seconds. Everyone can think about the first 10 seconds. That's super easy. The next thing is being able to know what to say within this section and make sure you're relevant. Exactly, you're relevant to the theme and the sub-theme, and make sure you know the themes and sub-themes off the top of your head. Make sure everything you say is relevant, okay? You can't be asked a question about theme 1 and then talk about theme 3. That's just not how it works. Incredibly vital. Sorry I didn't mention it earlier. Should have mentioned it, but really it is so important. Make sure you know your themes and sub-themes, but everything you say has to be relevant. So really what I like to do, as I said, speak to the wall, see where your mind goes, and just speak and speak and speak until you get tired, basically. I could do this for 30 or 40 minutes. I couldn't do this for hours. My brain would hurt too much. But when I first do this, I was really bad at it. I could barely string sentences together, and then I just stopped. My brain would freeze, and I'm like, that's it. Too bad. You can't do this. So what I do is just do that. Sit down, think, and then keep going. So okay, at the beginning, you won't be able to speak without stopping. In the beginning, it's alright if you say a sentence or you start half a sentence, stop, think, keep going, stop, think, keep going. That's alright. It's just good practice. Just make sure that whatever you do, you continuously going within a particular way, continuously letting your brain flow, and see where you go. That's great practice. That way, all these different themes in your head, you suddenly find links. I kid you not, I just randomly found links. I remember there's one particular day I went from the one-child policy in China to talking about the Dragon Boat Festival, and then I was talking about diets in China. I was like, how on earth did I do that? And it was just me speaking for 2 or 3 minutes and just going on and on and on and ranting, and eventually I managed to find these links that I actually used in my final exam. So it's really all these small things. So make sure, finally, just use the language bee, guys. There's no other way around it. We've already gone through the marking criteria. You know exactly what they're looking for now. You know how I practice it. I've given you 2 different methods that I use. I kid you not, this is literally all I use. You don't need 10 methods. Just use 2 and use them a lot. I don't know what else to tell you. Just use them. And good luck, guys, with your exams. I'm sure you will nail it now that you know exactly what's required from you. And that, thank you so much for listening. I know it is a long video. Very sorry about that. But it's every single thing that I wanted to include. And I hope you guys enjoyed it. And thank you for listening until the end. Good luck, guys, once again.